Please welcome to the stage Becky Pettit, Professor of Sociology at the University of Texas at Austin.
Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Becky Pettit, and I'm honored to be here today to introduce you to Jennifer Glass, the past president of the Population Association of America. Many of you know Jennifer well, having served with her on PAA committees, ASA committees, editorial boards, NICHD and NSF review panels, working with the Council for Contemporary Families, and more. You've read her scholarship, taught it in your classes, and cited it in your own. You may also have been on the faculty with her at USC, Notre Dame, Iowa, or Cornell, or are one of her current colleagues at the University of Texas at Austin. Or perhaps you were a student in one of her statistics classes, a scholar she has collaborated with or advised on research, or been the recipient of her generous support in your scholarly and professional development. I would like to extend a very warm welcome to all of you and to thank you for being here with us today. Jennifer Glass has been conducting research on American family life, gender inequality, and workplace policies for nearly 4 decades. She wrote about the gendered implications of telecommuting and remote work long before the COVID-19 pandemic. She wrote about the mental health implications of work-family conflict before it was common to acknowledge either family or work as key sources of stress, especially so for women. Her work has sought to describe and explain changing patterns of income and earnings among women and men and mothers and fathers. Her forthcoming book defines and celebrates the accomplishments of American women who provide and care for their families. Her scholarship has been ahead of its time, yet it's more timely than ever. With policy and practice relevance, her scholarship advances our understanding of our collective reliance on the work of women and women's resilience, even in the face of enduring and new challenges. Jennifer Glass's scholarship forces us to think hard about conventional ideas about gender, work, and family, and how policies and practices at the societal level and within workplaces and families influence women, men, children, and gender inequality. Jennifer Glass's vast scholarly expertise, combined with humility and generosity, have influenced generations of students and scholars. She walks the walk, combining work and family obligations with skill, dedication, grace, compassion, and wit. Jennifer learned early. Jennifer is the third of 4 children, born in Dallas, Texas. Jennifer has 2 older brothers. She was an adventurous and curious child. She was at the height of her princess phase when her younger sister was born. The arrival of her younger sister, born with significant health challenges, meant Jennifer lost her princess spot in the family, but she became very involved in caregiving for her sister. At the same time, she developed a love of reading and excelled in school. Jennifer was politically aware and engaged even as a young person. She relished serious conversations and, according to her sister, left notes on the household light switches to remind the family to turn off the lights. As the children grew, Jennifer took on greater caregiving responsibilities for her younger sister, read bigger books, and excelled even more in school. Jennifer's parents were symphony musicians, often working in the evenings. In a recent conversation, Jennifer's sister remembered, "Jennifer babysat me a lot. She was so responsible." Her sister also remembers her smiling, laughing. She was just cheerful. But she was also always reading, studying, and walking around with a thick book. When Jennifer was 16 and her sister was 10, Jennifer drove her sister to school every day. Her sister confessed that she worried that she made Jennifer late because she had to drop her off at school every day. Ever the brilliant communicator, Jennifer talked her way out of detention. But she was also learning the gendered cost of caregiving. Jennifer left high school at age 16 and enrolled in college at the New College of Florida. She received her degree in social sciences 3 years later. In 1977, when I was in my princess phase, Jennifer joined the graduate program at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. At the time, there were over 200 students in the PhD program, and Jennifer's cohort of 25 was the first to contain almost equal numbers of women and men. The faculty included 6 women at the time, if Jennifer's memory serves. Jennifer remembers being surrounded by amazing and smart people, taking time to engage with each other's work. It was there that she met Sarah McClanahan, and they're pictured together here, cooking something up. When asked about the experience at UW-Madison, Jennifer recalled thinking that although it wasn't easy, and I will quote, "This criticism will make your work stronger, and you are lucky that smart people have taken the time to critique your work," end quote. She shared with me a vivid memory of being complimented in stats class by Professor Chuck Hallaby for being one of the only students who successfully answered his statistics challenge exam questions on material that they had not yet covered. Yet a few months later, when she was sitting speechless in his office, not having the faintest idea how to interpret the results for her master's thesis. She is ever grateful for Chuck's handholding, which perhaps seemingly insignificant at the time was, in Jennifer's words, one of those butterfly effect things that you don't realize. Jennifer made her way through the PhD program and has been helping graduate students interpret statistical findings for over 3 decades. After her time at Madison, Jennifer took a position at USC in Los Angeles. Over the course of her career, she moved to Notre Dame, the University of Iowa, Cornell, and back to Iowa. She took on a variety of administrative and leadership positions, serving 4 times as department chair. She was also the primary breadwinner and caregiver in her family, supporting and being supported by her 2 incredibly talented and successful daughters, Caitlin and Annika. In 2012, she returned to her roots in Texas to be closer to her mother and to take a position at the University of Texas at Austin. Jennifer is an extraordinarily talented and productive scholar. She's been a path-breaking administrator, working to build and support policies, processes, and practices to advance science and foster equity and inclusion. She has been a stalwart supporter of emerging scholars. She says that she lucked out while she was at Wisconsin and worked with some of the best and brightest faculty, graduate students, and postdocs, including people like Biddy Martin, Sarah McClanahan, and many more. Jennifer was instrumental in bringing people together then, as she is now. She told me that back at Wisconsin, the many women students who wanted to study gender stratification and feminist theory had to organize ourselves into reading groups and independent study sections. We taught each other. In the years since, she's worked continuously to facilitate collaborations and foster community. A scholar who works in related areas said of Jennifer, "I've always appreciated her generous welcoming of me and so many others at conferences and other meetings, and her eagerness to get into it in conversation about our scholarship and policy too." In her roles as a scholar, teacher, administrator, colleague, mentor, daughter, mother, sister, and friend, Jennifer has been a source of support, strength, courage, and curiosity. She brings out the best in those around her with unfailing generosity and humility. Jennifer's scholarship has been funded by the National Science Foundation, the National Institutes of Health, the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation. Her work has appeared in the American Journal of Sociology, the American Sociological Review, Social Forces, the Journal of Marriage and the Family, Demography, among others. She has received the Jessie Bernard Award from the American Sociological Association, the Harriet Presser Award from the PAA, the Reuben Hill Award from the National Council on Family Relations, and thrice been nominated for the Rosabeth Moss-Cantor Award for Excellence in Work-Family Research. She's chaired the Sex and Gender section, the Family section, the Organizations and Work section, and has been vice president of the American Sociological Association. Today, we're honoring her for her work as the past president of the Population Association of America. I couldn't be happier to be here to introduce you to Jennifer, to reflect on her many professional accomplishments, and to share a few stories. Jennifer is a model colleague, mentor, and friend. She does stellar research. She teaches so many students so well. She's long taught graduate statistics and has recently grown a very timely undergraduate course on fertility and reproduction. The need is real, and she has responded. She is a stellar departmental, university, and professional citizen, as you all know well. But she's also just Jennifer, partner to Doug, mom to Caitlin and Annika, and grandma to Rose. My own children recall Jennifer inviting us on a hike when we first moved to Austin. Whoops, how did we get there? Oh, are the slides moving up there? Oh, sorry. Slides moved in front of me. When we first moved to Austin, Jennifer invited my family, my children and I, on a hike. My youngest was in her princess phase, and my oldest would have rather been reading a book. Jennifer took us and her beloved pup, Bia, to Barton Creek, followed by tacos at Taco Deli. Every time my now young adult children come home, they ask about Jennifer, and they visit those places. Jennifer has made an impact on them, as she has on so many of us. Despite all the impact of Jennifer's work, professional and personal, Jennifer is incredibly humble. According to her sister Megan, Jennifer is so humble that her family didn't realize the importance of her work until one day she, her sister Megan, hopped into her car while running errands with her daughters. She turned on the radio, NPR. Professor Jennifer Glass was being interviewed about her research. The girls' eyes got wide and said to their mom, "Wait, that's Aunt Jennifer." With that, I would like to turn the microphone over to Jennifer Glass, professor of sociology at the University of Texas at Austin and past president of the Population Association of America.
I am so happy to see all of you here. I first want to thank all of you for coming to Washington for PAA this year, despite the turmoil, loss of funding, and prohibitions on travel for federal workers that prevented so many of us from participating or attending this year. To those of you who managed to come despite these difficulties and anxieties, especially those from Latin America, Canada, Europe, and Asia, we thank you for your support in these turbulent times in the United States and for having the courage to keep the flow of open scientific expertise and information going, despite threats to non-citizens on our shores at present. We understand why others chose to avoid or boycott Washington at this time. Let me assure you right now that PAA remains committed to supporting the reliable, accurate, open, and accessible collection and analysis of population data in the United States and abroad without censorship or political interference in an open and free society. And now, I'll tell you what I came here to say. The title of my talk is The Motherlode. That's the name of a rock that keeps on giving. And the talk today hopefully will convince you that motherhood in the United States has become that rock, that foundation of economic support for growing numbers of America's children. So I'm going to begin today with a really big number, 71%. As demographers, there are a few numbers that get this big when we talk about events that happened in a population. That's the estimated probability that a mother today bearing her first child will become the primary breadwinner in her household before that child turns 18. The number dips slightly if we reduce the age to 8. Almost 50% of American mothers will become the primary breadwinner for their household before their first child turns 8. This is information gleaned from the Survey of Income and Program Participation, looking at both those who are who give their first birth as breadwinners, so the babies are born into a maternal breadwinning home, and those who transition at some point in the future. All of the information that you'll see today come from analysis of the Survey of Income and Program Participation over time. The surveys are pre-COVID. We don't have accurate SIP data since COVID. I'm anxiously looking forward to that. I am pretty sure that I will see a continuation of the trends that are reported here. So why is it important that we analyze this number? The first is that mothers are often assumed, both in our imagination and, importantly, among policymakers, to be secondary earners. Motherhood pay penalties are not considered an urgent policy problem. We assume that there are other people who are also supporting children. And the second problem is that this intensification is occurring quite early in mothers' lives. So it's not happening when they're older, their children are nearly grown. Most of it is happening in the first few years after birth. Children are vulnerable to poverty, and they're vulnerable to the amount of time that they live in constrained circumstances. So the fact that these conditions are happening early in the life course of children is of potential concern. So this is not my slide. I give a big shout out to the Pew Research Center. This is a chart that I copied from one of their publications. They use a slightly different definition of breadwinning than I do. But this is their chart of growth over time in mothers as primary or sole earners between 1960 and 2017. The reason I want you to notice this graph is that the pace of change not only dramatically escalates post-2000, but the divergence between the proportion who are single or lone mothers and those who are partnered becomes really dramatic as well. By 2017, almost half of the mothers who are breadwinners for their children are partnered. They have a partner present in the household. This is a very, very significant change. So I'm going to organize this talk around 3 very important questions. The first is just, what is the likelihood that a mother is going to become the primary economic provider for her child in different racial and educational groups? How has this likelihood changed over time, and why are mothers' financial roles in supporting the next generation of Americans growing so much and so rapidly? And finally, what are the economic consequences? How much should we worry about this transition of economic support from fathers and others to mothers themselves? What will be the impact on the human capital of the next generation? So, I start with parsing that 71% number. What does it really look like when we dig down into educational attainment and racial and ethnic identification? I'm hopeful that what you see in this slide is that the glass is both half full and half empty. There is some variation, but there's remarkably little by educational attainment, a bit more by race, but there is no demographic group that has a less than 50% probability. So this, again, means that the risk of becoming the primary breadwinner are much greater than the risk of being able to survive your career as a mother without assuming the primary financial obligation for your children. If you look at the shape of this, particularly for education, you can see that the largest relative probability is for the some college group, not for college graduates. And this is also interesting because we're seeing the concentration of pressures on mothers to become the primary financial providers, not in the category where mothers have the highest ability to earn income. So this is among the some college, rather than college graduates. I'm going to move now because everybody quickly wants to know, well, that's just, did you ever become a breadwinner for a given year? That's a very short duration of time. So let me give you a more expansive definition of what we've done here analytically. We define mothers as a primary earner for her household if you take all of the earnings in the household and she has provided more than 60%. The Pew Research Center and other analysts often use 50%. We've been convinced by the work of Philip Cohen and others that we really want to make sure that these are households dependent primarily on mothers' earnings. The 60% threshold does that. When we look at our maternal breadwinners on an annual basis and we look at the average proportion that they are contributing, we find that it's over 90%. So we're on the right track. It's anybody who 60% or more, the average becomes about 90%. So this slide really, looking at that definition, is asking how many years, once you have entered that state, how many years on average can you expect to stay in that state? And this is broken down into how many years partnered and unpartnered. The best way to look at this is to just look at the entire size of the bar. And by education, what you can see is that these numbers are significant. Almost all of these levels of educational attainment have at least a duration of almost 5 years. The average is closer to 6. And for the Some College group, which of course had the highest probability of becoming a maternal breadwinner, it's almost 7 years. So these durations are long. This is not a function of the breadwinner role simply being shifted between mom and dad 1 year versus the next, or temporary changes in income. These seem to be durable and sustainable shifts in how childhood is financed. So how does education actually matter? Well, it looks as if you're in the least educated groups, your low levels of human capital make it difficult to become a family breadwinner because you have more difficulty finding and retaining a job. So breadwinning becomes difficult simply because finding and keeping a job is difficult. With more education, especially college degrees, we see that the marriage market enters, and those women are more likely to have higher earning partners. So while they themselves have the highest capacity to earn income, they also have the benefit of a homogamous marriage market in which their partners make more. So the risk is less than that of mothers with some college but not a degree. But it's not significantly less, so I don't want to exaggerate the extent to which a college degree will put you in a marriage market that gives you an affluent partner. It definitely does not shield those women from breadwinning, but they are not the category with the highest likelihood. So this is the same duration slide, only it's broken down by race and ethnicity. And here we see more variation, and it's more expected variation. We know that there's a long historical tradition of African American mothers being the primary earners in their households, and not surprisingly, that is reflected in an average duration for Black mothers of 8 years once they have entered the status of primary breadwinner. If you look at white and Hispanic mothers, who are the other large groups in this table, you can see that their durations are closer to 6 years. And Asians and others in the SIP, these are relatively small groups, so I take those numbers with some caution because I think our sample sizes are a little bit low. But anyway, the important point here is that durations are long and that much of that time they are partnered. Now, why do we think we're seeing these racial distinctions aside from the historical position of African American mothers? Well, we think that Hispanic moms are rapidly increasing their educational attainment over time, but we think that they, despite the fact that many male Hispanic earners are disadvantaged, we think that the women in these categories still have difficulty because many recent immigrants face language barriers or educational barriers that make it difficult for them to earn enough to become the family breadwinner. So while we see rapid growth, we also see the impact of a constant influx of new immigrants in that group. Asian moms have the lowest durations and the lowest relative risk of becoming a family breadwinner. That's in large part because their rates of non-marital childbearing are low, and their rates of relationship dissolution are also low, and this reduces breadwinning likelihood. We think, however, that this population is rapidly changing and that this might change as well. So now we're going to try to look a little bit at change over time. So I hope I've convinced you that this is a prominent feature of the financing of childhood today. Now the question is, how did we get there? And for this, we compare the 1996 SIP to the 2014 to 2017 SIP panel. So the first question to ask about this change over time is, how many mothers literally give birth as breadwinners? So they are the breadwinner of their household before their first birth, they go through pregnancy and birth, and that child is born into a female breadwinning household. And the answer is not too many. In 1996, the number was less than 10%. It had grown, more than doubled by 2014 to 19%, but that still leaves 81% of the breadwinning mothers in the SIP enter that status after the child is born. This is, of course, not unexpected because many, many women reduce their labor force participation around the time of a birth, and many now are able to take leave. So we would not expect them to immediately become breadwinners. If they then become breadwinners over time, the question is, how? How does that happen? So that was our next goal. We decided we would call these pathways into breadwinning, and it turns out there's really a finite number of life events that make a mother the primary earner in her household. The first and most obvious is a partner exit, and this is what you're probably all sitting at your chairs thinking, oh, there's just a lot of partner exits. No, that is one way, but it is not a way that's growing over time. Then we move to what we call the precarity. Well, partner exits could be part of labor market precarity, but we see many instances where partners' incomes have dropped. They are either losing their jobs, or they're losing hours, or they're losing earnings. We also see that there are a few households in which partners' incomes are stagnant, but moms' incomes are increasing. So mothers' earnings have, in fact, Claudia Golden has shown this in her work repeatedly, mothers' incomes have in fact improved because mothers are not only more likely to be educated, but they are more likely to enter and stay in the labor force following the cessation of their education through pregnancy and birth. So labor market continuity, both labor market experience and immediate job tenure are much higher than they were 20 years ago. So we do see some moms' earnings increases until they surpass their partners. Another very common arrangement, however, is when both happen simultaneously. A partner loses income and a mom gains income simultaneously. In fact, this is the most common pathway into breadwinning. And finally, there are other earner exits or losses in income. And this would be predominantly for young mothers, those who had non-marital births, or those who had quick relationship dissolutions after birth. They could be doubled up, they could be in an extended household, and these could be parents of the mother, they could be siblings of the mother, or other relatives or boarders. So is the likelihood that mothers become breadwinners increasing over time? Yes, it definitely is. In a paper with Joanna Pepin in Demography, we recently showed that the rate rose 50% between 1996 and 2014, driven mostly by these two demographic groups, white mothers and college-educated mothers, whose risks were the most dramatic to elevate. But just as important were the non-causes. There is not more divorce or relationship dissolution now than in the past. Family scholars have been documenting this for about 2 decades now, that the divorce risk has basically leveled out, and especially hasn't changed dramatically between 1996 and 2017. We also don't have higher maternal labor force participation. This has also stagnated between 1996 and 2017. And surprisingly, it's not due to shifts in mothers versus fathers' earnings, despite the fact that that gap has, in some research, been shown to have gotten smaller over time. In our breadwinning mothers sample, we do not see that. So, what does explain the recent increase? We believe it is these 3 factors, and we combine our pathways into these 3 explanations. The first is labor market precarity. Partners without college degrees face ongoing job insecurity and precarity in their earnings, frequent layoffs, frequent reductions in size, and frequent difficulties in getting enough hours of work per week to maintain a breadwinning income. The pathways that correspond to this in our analysis are partner down, partner left, and mom up, partner down. So a partner experienced precarity, and a mother attempted to ameliorate that by increasing her labor force participation or earnings. The second is the gender revolution in mothers' education and labor force continuity. That we have seen dramatic changes in, for example, mothers' receipt of college degrees. A full 10 percentage change between 1996 and 2014. That is 10% more mothers have advanced degrees. So here we see mothers' human capital growth promoting increased earnings in ways that might allow them to exceed their partner's earnings, especially given the growth in college attendance and continuous labor force participation around the first birth. The pathway that most directly corresponds to this is just mom up employed. Everything else in the household has stayed the same, but the mom's earnings have gone up. And the final theoretical explanation is the shift to financial independence among lone mothers. And this is really about changing welfare state support. This happened right in 1996 with the passage of welfare reform. And in our analysis, this shift to financial independence is caused both by partners leaving, but these are partners that have left, a fairly long time ago in the past, but mostly by the pathway of mom up from unemployment. So what distinguishes this from the gender revolution is that these are mothers who were not employed. They were forced into employment by a shift in a policy of who is going to pay for the children of lone mothers, away from public provision and towards a push to get mothers into the labor force. So in our analysis of change, what we're going to do is we're going to look at mothers who are both employed at the time and get a wage increase and mothers who are forced into employment, oftentimes willingly, but nevertheless, it's as a result of this policy change. So here is, we did sort of a shift share analysis here, and we can see both, well, I'll show you first the total change, both frequency and impact. And here's where you can really see that the bulk of the explanation for why the rate of transitioning into the primary earner among mothers has gone up is an increase in this pathway of mom up and partner down. That accounts for fully 48% of the change in the probability that a mother will become a primary earner. If you look at the second largest contributor, it's mom's earnings up, but this combines two very different groups that we will separate in later analyses. And that is mothers whose earnings are up from their current employment, so they're getting promotions or raises, and mothers whose earnings are up from zero. They were not employed, and now they are employed, oftentimes in low-wage jobs. You can see that a partner leaving actually accounts for very little, and a partner's earnings down only without the mother responding also accounts for very little. So among our pathways, we can see that these are the two dominant and the remainder are less important. So how has this change happened? The slide I just showed you is sort of total impact. So we went down into the weeds and looked at frequency versus impact. And of course, the frequency of events does not explain the growth of mothers breadwinning. Fathers were getting laid off in 1996. Fathers were losing earnings in 1996. Fathers were leaving households in 1996. So things were happening at about the same rate and have been pretty constant over time. We have not seen a huge, huge change. What we are seeing is the impact has dramatically changed, so that when these life events happen, when economic precarity, for example, enters a household, a mother is far more likely to respond by becoming the breadwinner than in the past. So, in essence, what we're trying to say is that if you look overall at these high probabilities and at these pathways, we can see that our image of the family in the United States really needs to change. Both the traditional breadwinner housewife, which we know has been disappearing for a while, but also the neo-traditional household of a male breadwinner and a female secondary earner are on the decline. It's mother-supported and co-breadwinning households with children that are rising. And by co-breadwinning, we mean those households that are somewhere between 40 and 60%. So one partner is 40 plus, another is 60 minus. Those are what we would consider co-breadwinning households. So those are really what constitute America's families right now among partnered households. My final question is, does it matter? Does it matter if mothers are providing more and more economic support for children? Perhaps it doesn't. Unfortunately, what we find is that on average, households lose income when the mother becomes the primary earner. This is a slide that simply shows you the household income to needs ratio changes in households in the year prior to the mother becoming the household breadwinner and in the year following. So that you can see in 1996, we saw about a 33% drop in the income to needs ratio when a mother became the breadwinner. By the time the 2014 SIP panel data had been analyzed, the drop was only 27%, so a decline from 33% to 27%. So a small improvement over time, but nevertheless, the overarching conclusion is that the results are not positive overall. On average, we can see that there is a loss in the ability of households to meet their income needs when mothers become breadwinners. But we want to unpack that a little bit and find out about the heterogeneity across households. So this is the total distribution of gains and losses in the year that mothers become breadwinners in thousands of dollars. What's unusual about this distribution is that it almost looked normal, except for this weird little blip in the middle, so that you can see kind of like flat bars, and then all of a sudden one stands up and says 14%. That is the change between negative and positive. And the surprise here is that 50% of households see an income gain when a mom becomes the breadwinner, and 50% see a loss. So remember, the average is loss, overall households, and yet 50% experience a gain. Well, this explains it. The gains are far smaller than the losses. So when households experience income gains, they're in that 14% bar. It's very small income gain in that bar. So households that gain income gain a little bit, but households that lose income, if you look at the left-hand side of that graph, you can see quite clearly that the losses can be very large. Very large losses are not uncommon, whereas very large gains are uncommon. So, what do we know about these households? We know some households do see their economic well-being increase, but most are unable to clear their income to needs thresholds. So this little bar simply breaks down these categories. Among the 50% that see an income rise, only 26% meet their income to needs threshold. In the rest of the households that see rising income, and most of these are single mothers or mothers in extended households who've been moved from welfare to work, we see that income is up, but it is not up high enough to meet their income to needs threshold. And in the remaining half, of course, we know that income is down. Now, here is my challenge question to the PAA audience. Can race or educational attainment explain this pattern? Hey, I'm a demographer. I work with these all the time. I really wanted race and educational attainment to explain this pattern. And it doesn't. Sorry. It's a challenge question. I didn't even give you a chance to raise your hands. This is a messy slide, and I apologize for it in advance, but I want you to only look at the red numbers. So just concentrate on the red. So if you look at the column that has all the red numbers, this is just the percentage of households that made this transition into a mother breadwinner household, and what was the percentage that saw their income go up. And the first panel is by education, and the second is by race. And if you look at those red numbers, what you'll notice is that they're almost all the same. Huh? Help? This is not supposed to happen. We are so certain that race and educational attainment structure opportunity in life in the United States. And we looked at these numbers. We just chased them a lot, thinking we must have done something wrong, but they come out pretty much looking like this. What's ironic is that it turns out for education that the college educated are actually slightly less likely to see their income go up from this change, despite the fact that these are the group of moms who have the highest ability to earn income. This, of course, is explained by other family dynamics and other institutional dynamics about who loses jobs and how big a loss it is when they lose their job in terms of income. It's a similar story by race. Again, the percent with income up after a mom becomes the breadwinner is lowest among whites, and it's higher among Black and Hispanic mothers Again, these are counterintuitive to what we would expect, but I don't want to make too much of these very, very small differences, because in essence, if somebody gave me a quick look at this chart, I would say, yeah, there's nothing there. So what's going on? What we think is happening, and I'll show you in the next slide, is that class and race change the pathways, both positive and negative, that those mothers are going to be likely to experience. But every demographic group has a combination of positive and negative pathways. It's just which ones, the mix, that changes by race and by educational attainment. So I'm going to try and show you what I mean here. These are the pathways. We've divided the mom-up pathway into two because the relative risk for different racial and educational groups really changes when you look at a mother who's already employed and gets a raise or a promotion versus a mother who's not employed and is pushed into the labor market by welfare reform. But both pathways, the mom-up employed and the mom-up unemployed, are going to give you a boost to household income. The mom-up partner down in earnings pathway is the one with the big question mark. This is the one where mother's human capital might make a difference, and her capacity to increase her workload. Can she change jobs? Can she increase her work hours? Can she do something to ameliorate the loss of income from her partners? And sometimes the answer is yes, sometimes the answer is no, but really what we see is that there are not many women who can escape an income loss in that situation, and the numbers who actually manage to fully compensate are relatively low. The partner down pathway, nothing else has happened in the household and a mother is not able to ramp up her earnings, is clearly going to have a negative impact on the household. And another household earner change, and the mother not responding with an increase in her market supply or earnings, will also produce a negative impact. And of course, a partner exit without any change in a mother's employment status will assuredly produce a negative impact, unless of course the exit occurs because he was unemployed. So the important point is that in essence, these pathways into breadwinning over-determine the consequence for all of the pathways except for what we consider the kind of compensation pathway of mom up and partner down, which, remember, is a very big proportion of these transitions. This is an enormous pathway. This is another messy slide, and what I'm going to try to do is break it down. And I have a very colorful version, and I understand that what you're seeing is shades of gray, so I'm going to try and translate my colorful version into your shades of gray. But what you want to look at is you want to kind of look at the variation across education groups in the size of the bar that represents each pathway. So for example, I'm going to start with the College Plus group, and I'm going to start with the Gender Revolution pathway, and that's mom up, employed, nothing else has changed in the household. That means she became the breadwinner because she got a raise or a promotion and nothing else happened in the household. That's the true gender revolution story. If you look at the college-educated group, you can see that that's 20% of their transitions. So it's not the majority, but it's still a hefty chunk. And that does represent the success of mother's increased human capital. But then if you go to the high school or less category, you can see that that gender revolution explanation, mom's earnings up alone and she was employed before, drops from 20% to 5.2. But then you look at the orange bar, which is mom up unemployed, and you can see that that's a rare situation among the college educated. Most of these moms are already employed. But if you shift to the high school or less, that's a full 29% of the transitions into breadwinning. These are occurring among mothers who are being pushed into the labor force by changes in welfare. So, what can we conclude from all of this? Has the gender revolution prevailed, or are moms just exploited? And I'm sorry, I went straight to the extremes. But I think the results show that more households face financial distress than see income gains after mothers become primary providers, even though half of all households experience a growth in income. So the point here is that the growth in income does not necessarily make these households better off. They're still not meeting their income to needs ratios. 16% are falling when they experience this transition into the mother becoming the breadwinner, and only 6% escape being below their income to needs ratio of 1 when the mother becomes the breadwinner. So those two numbers in themselves show that this is a highly variable outcome, but unfortunately we see more negative than positive consequences. And this suggests that the gender revolution, while it's an important, is a relatively small factor in the growth of mothers as breadwinners. So I leave you with a lot of takeaways, so bear with me. The first and probably most important is simply that most American mothers will become their household's primary financial provider before their first child turns 18. Not clear that all American mothers understand this, but they certainly have experienced it, and we see writ large dramatic increases in the labor force attachment and the educational attainment of American women before they become mothers for the first time. This is also true across mothers' ethnicity and educational attainment, which makes it one of those demographic changes that is profoundly interpenetrated throughout the American class structure. Second, the annual rate at which mothers take over financial provisioning has grown dramatically, over 50% since 1996. And that labor market polarization and wage precarity among partners account for fully 41% of mothers' annual transitions into the primary earner status. So this is an important net result of labor market precarity that is oftentimes forgotten. And of course, welfare reform also contributes mightily to this transition as well. High rates of non-marital childbearing combined with the change in welfare state support in 1996 means that another 20% of annual transitions into the breadwinner status among mothers comes from non-employed mothers moving into paying jobs to support their children. And these mothers are disproportionately likely to have less education and less market experience. We also know that most partner earnings declines. We went back and we looked at this category. Okay, when partner earnings decline, how do households respond? Over 60% were simultaneously met with mothers' earnings increases. So we do see this dynamism in the household, that mothers are frantically trying to make up for the lost income when their partners, and most of these are heterosexual couples, when their partners lose income or lose jobs. And this does reflect women's growing human capital, but it's simply not enough to forestall overall household income losses. And finally, we want to note that there is this success story of mothers' human capital growth and mothers' earnings attainment accounting for their transition into the primary breadwinner role. But that alone only accounts for about 10% of the transitions in the contemporary time period. And unfortunately, they are concentrated among women with a college degree. And finally, among those mothers transitioning from welfare to work, we do see this positive impact. Other scholars have noted this. So household incomes are improving. Employment does seem to be a strategy that helps low-income households. But it is simply not enough without supplementation. We're in the process of thinking about doing additional analyses, adding in the EITC to see how much current EITC rates would improve the household income to needs ratios for these households. But clearly, without some kind of wage supplementation, these households would be in bad shape. So I want to end with some policy questions. The United States has slowly, inexorably moved, I think in some ways unthinkingly, into a position in which more and more and more of the fiscal responsibility for children are placed on mothers themselves, while failing to significantly lessen with any kind of work-family policy legislation or any employment or employer regulation that would lessen the impact of women's daily obligations for family care. So we don't have a universal paid leave of significant duration. We don't have a universal pre-K system or a universal child care system. We have some financial subsidies for some groups of mothers, but no comprehensive work-family program the way that the Nordic states or most of the European Union have. Mothers in the United States have responded to this state of affairs by increasing their education and labor force attachment mightily, as much as they can. Mothers are my heroes. The numbers of mothers that have been documented over time, increasing their capacity to care for their households financially as well as physically and emotionally, are striking and dramatic. but it's simply not enough in an employment structure that punishes and penalizes caregivers. So what are the consequences for future fertility? I would like to throw out a challenge to fertility researchers to incorporate all of this into their analyses of dropping fertility in the United States. What does it mean for mothers and children's flourishing? So those of you who do developmental science, who are interested in the fate of kids, what does this transition of fiscal responsibility mean for what we can expect in terms of future generations' preparedness for assuming adult roles in the labor market and in the family? And of course, what does this mean for an already bad concentration of wealth in the United States, but an even greater concentration of wealth among those without childrearing obligations? So I want to leave you pondering all of those things, but I also want to not end before a huge shout out to my team. I don't know where they are in the room, but none of this would have happened without both the brain trust and the statistical competence of these three people, Dr. Kelly Rayleigh, Dr. Joanna Pepin, and Dr. Kim Mackerline, without whom I could not have done any of this work. And I also want a final shout out to Deborah Umberson and the Center for Aging and Population Studies and the Population Research Center at the University of Texas, because they gave us the seed money for this project. Who knew that a little bit would go this far? So I thank you for your time and your patience, and I look forward to your thoughts and your comments.